Welcome to a special Saturday segment episode of the Ace for Waves podcast. I'm your host, Annabelle. I have a special guest joining me again. This is my brother, Michael. He is the sports genius slash analyst slash expert within our family. Our youngest brother is also a big sports person. Both of them grew up doing sports, whether that be basketball, baseball, flag football, both golfed, both ran cross country in middle school. Probably did more sports than I can count, and I'm probably forgetting some. But that's besides the point. We just did. We just recorded an episode where we did a little preview of Super Bowl 58, so be sure to check that out. But this is something new. This is something that I kind of came up with on the fly a few days ago, and I call it Saturday Special Segments, which means every once in a while, probably just once a month, I'll do an episode on a Saturday, and it's just going to be a topic of interest to me. Usually, I try to record main episodes on Wednesdays, but I had him coming to see me up in Cedar Falls for the Super Bowl tomorrow. That's why we did episode 2 today. So we did do a little preview of Super Bowl 58. So you can expect main episodes to be recorded and uploaded again on Wednesdays. But for today's Saturday special segment, I thought it would be fun here to ask Michael, and we can kind of talk about, is it time to stop putting expectations on teams when they haven't met certain standards pertaining to just the NFL? Michael here is a Dallas Cowboys fan. I'm a Carolina Panthers fan, so I've been disappointed for the past 2 seasons. Well, actually, probably past 4 seasons. So nothing new there. I'm used to it. But Ashton, our youngest brother, is a Green Bay Packers fan. My mother is a Chiefs fan, but she grew up in Kansas City, so she's now a bandwagon. And then our father grew up a Dallas Cowboys fan pretty much since childhood. So all 5 of us have different teams, with the exception of, obviously Michael and our father. But I want to know your take. What do you feel about media and like NFL analysis, or anyways just sports analysts putting certain expectations on teams when they haven't met that standard in previous years?
Yeah, I would say usually in the off season, they usually kind of praise teams a lot, like saying, "All right, this is a standard for the teams," even though they haven't met them. The Dallas Cowboys standard is always a Super Bowl. But do we and the media always thinks, "All right, they're going to make the Super Bowl because they have this type of roster and all that." But it never really shows in the playoffs. So they just kind of a lot of overhyping too in the off season. The Bills get a lot of off-season hype. Everybody's thinking Josh Allen, this could be the year. They're kind of in the same situation as the Cowboys, where they haven't been able to get to the AFC Championship or the Super Bowl. But yeah, they really overhype a lot of teams in the NFL before the season even starts. We haven't seen how the team has performed. In the offseason, there's a lot of movement, a lot of trades, players going to different teams. There's a lot of adjustments going on as a team. So yeah, that's pretty much it. You just a lot of adjustments. So when they see like, oh, this team's got a lot of talent, they should make the Super Bowl. But some people forget that they get calls from the offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, which can make a huge impact to your season. Everybody thinks it's a player's fault on stuff like this. It could be the defense, a coordinator, offensive coordinator, head coach, athletic trainers, maybe not getting their players ready for the game. So there's a lot to go into it in hyping up teams a lot. And it's usually just in the off season they do it a lot because they just kind of like, oh, this team's going to look good and all that. So I would say, yeah, they need to stop overhyping teams until we see them start the year in full swing in September, October, when the season's in full gear, where you can make assumptions about teams and how they play.
So obviously, with the Cowboys last season, they made it to the divisional round. They defeated the Bucks, kind of in the wild card. They went on to play the 49ers in the divisional round last year. Lost, I want to say 19-12. So there was a lot of expectations heading into this particular season, and like the first two games, the Cowboys were winning by 40, like a blowout, 40 to
40 to
nothing,
nothing, then
and
30 to
then
10 against the New York Jets.
30-10
So
against the New York Jets, and then ultimately they lost like 42-10 to the 49ers in week 4. I want to say week 4 or 5.
I think it was week 5.
Week 5.
I think maybe 4 or 5. Yeah.
4 or 5. But they finished out their season with a 12-5 record under head coach Mike McCarthy, and that has happened all previous seasons. Like the past 3 seasons, they have gotten 12 wins. So, just we're gonna get to postseason stuff and playoff stuff in a moment here, but is 12 wins impressive in the NFL?
Yes. Any time you can get 12 wins in a season, going 12-5 since they moved to the 17 games, is really impressive. You know, you beat 12 NFL teams. There's 30 teams, and so when you can win 12 games in a regular season, you know, even if your strength of schedule is not up to par, you know, winning 12 games is super well. I mean, you had a great year. You know, you only lost 5 games. You more than likely won your division if you win 12 games. Maybe take second place depending on who's in your division, you know. But more than likely, if you win 12 games, I would say you would win in 4 or 5 divisions for sure this year. So there's nothing wrong with winning 12 games for sure. But can you incorporate those 12 wins into more wins into in the postseason is the other question. You know, you can have a great season in the regular season, but there's two different seasons. You know, you got the regular season, and then you got a postseason. And so if you can go 12-5 every year but lose first round in the postseason, it just kind of feels like a waste of 12 wins. Like, oh, you did all that work from the start from September to December, all that hard work to win your division possibly. Then you get into the postseason, you lose first round, and you just kind of feel like a letdown, you know? And it kind of sucks the difference between, I'll kind of bring in the NBA. Because in the NFL, you get one game, one shot to move on. NBA, you get 7 games. So you can have one bad night and still be able to win. But one night in the NFL, and you're heading home. So, yeah.
So were like the expectations on the Dallas Cowboys this season, were they valid?
Yeah, I would say they were valid. I mean, usually our expectation is to win the division, get 12, 13 wins, usually is what I expect them to get every year. And they were able to meet those. Um, and the Eagles should have won the division, but they just didn't play well in January, where momentum is key to have. And they were playing well in the early year of the year. It kind of felt like a letdown year for the Eagles as well. You start the season out really, really well. Best record in the NFL through 12, 13 weeks. But then, you know, the momentum just shifted. And they did get lucky on a lot of wins up in the earlier of the season. And I knew it was going to haunt them one of these times. Like, they're going to lose one game. They're not going to finish it out. And they didn't. And it kind of felt like a wasted season where the Eagles were looking like Super Bowl champions, more than likely in the Super Bowl most of the year until they just fell apart at the end. And it just kind of just was a letdown for sure for them.
So, but one could argue though that the Eagles did not look like a 10-1 football team.
No, they did not. They had, I think I counted 7 or 8 games that they won by less than one possession. So they had a lot of one possession wins, which can balance out. You say you go like 4-4 out of 8 games that you won by less than a touchdown. Then it's a different story. Then you're kind of a wild card type of team where you're a 6 or 7 seed, and you know it kind of just falls. They just got luck. There's some teams that get lucky. You see the Vikings though, another great example. They went like 10-1 in one possession games last year, and then this year they were under 500 in one possession games. So just kind of like it's kind of luck. Sometimes it's luck where you know teams get, oh well they won this one possession game, and it just kind of depends. But it did kind of haunt the Vikings where they were 10-1 in one possession games. Everybody knowing that they were getting lucky, and they did lose in the first round of playoffs. Same way as the Eagles. So winning close games, having a great record to start the year really doesn't matter in the postseason because you've seen those teams fall and lose first round.
I
So
yeah, I feel like this year we saw like a lot of letdowns for quite a few teams in general. So the expectation with the Dallas Cowboys is, can you show up in the big moments in the postseason? And that has proven over like the past 5 or 6 years to be inaccurate. We have not seen the Dallas Cowboys play well in the postseason. But it's not just the Cowboys. There's also the narrative of the Buffalo Bills making it past certain rounds in the playoffs. There's the narrative that Lamar can't win playoff games, and evidently that also happened, albeit in the AFC Championship game.
and then it also kind of feels like a letdown for the Ravens as well. I mean, their performance against the 49ers, that was probably one of the best football games they played all year. They were playing so well, had the best record in the NFL, number one seed, and they're gone. And it's just kind of just another letdown for the Ravens where they hadn't made the Super Bowl in a long time since 2011, 2012. It's been like 10 or 11 years. But it's just another letdown where I thought at the end of the regular season they were going to win the Super Bowl. Like, no team was as much talented, and they just kind of fell apart against the Chiefs, which I think it's a perfect situation where you're the one seed, you're one game away from the Super Bowl, you're playing at home, where you need to win home games in the playoffs. Those are crucial to have. Chiefs were able to win 2 road games, and now they're in the Super Bowl for tomorrow. So
I think you could also make the argument, even though I know their starting quarterback did get injured, but the Cincinnati Bengals as well, making
yes,
playoffs in the past 3 or 4 years or so, and then not even clinching a playoff berth. I know they did lose Joe Burrow about midway through the season, so that obviously was a factor in it.
and also for the
But
Jets too, another factor losing Aaron Rodgers was just it just kind of sucked for the Jets for sure, losing Aaron Rodgers, and MVP, Hall of Fame quarterback earlier. I mean, 4 snaps into the season they lost him, so that was huge. They had high expectations. A lot of people were praising the Jets for having to make the playoffs, make it to the AFC Championship with Rodgers, and also with the Bengals. I think they had a great team that they had, but just injuries kind of haunted them, and they just didn't have enough players. The backups didn't play up to the expectations, which is it is. I mean, backups are they're just there, and they just don't know how much time they're gonna get. Don't have as much reps as the starters. Starters were hurt for the Bengals, and they weren't able to have the season they expected to have this year.
so what I want to ask you is it time to stop putting expectations on teams when they haven't risen to the standard?
Yeah, I think you need to, set the bar not as high for these teams that are playing. You need to get. I mean, like we talked about earlier, the Cowboys' first 2 games of the season, they looked like they were unbeatable. They were outscoring opponents 70-10. But you got to let the season go on. It's not a 2 game season. It's not a 4 game season. 17 game regular season, where I would say you can start putting expectations on teams in the middle of the season, and definitely for sure in the postseason season. But earlier in the year, I just don't like teams being expected to be this good when you haven't seen them play fully, and especially in preseason. I just don't like seeing them praise and just put expectations on them on preseason either. I just want to see it during the middle or uh, last end of the regular season to put expectations on teams instead of the off season and earlier part of the season where they haven't been fully capable of playing with players they've been used to.
So obviously we have the narrative obviously of, well, the Cowboys can't win postseason games. I'm just going to use your favorite team for example, but one could argue against the Green Bay Packers in this year's wild card game. They Cowboys just looked completely unprepared offensively and defensively, again with special teams too. And a lot of that blame went to the head coach Mike McCarthy for just having this really great regular season and then once again just coming up short in the postseason. But do these head coaches, in your opinion, deserve all of the blame for a failed postseason run?
I would say mostly they should be blamed because they're in charge of everything. They're in charge of the coaches, they're in charge of the players, just they're in charge of every single thing. I would say they should be blamed, yes, for mostly. I would say 70-75% of the loss for sure. Just because they got to get these players prepared, get their minds right, get their health right. Just making sure they are ready for the game at 100%. But the Cowboys in their game, they weren't. They looked like they were getting outmatched by a young team. The Packers were the youngest team in the NFL. I mean, this team was super young. Cowboys had experience. And that just goes on credit to Matt LaFleur, great coach, great young coach who outcoached Mike McCarthy 100%. And Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys just looked shocked. They were just like, they just weren't prepared. The Packers were like, you know what, we're the underdogs, but that doesn't mean we can't win. They came into the game with a lot of confidence, and they just showed the Cowboys who they were, and they played a great game. And I would say the blame does go on Mike McCarthy for not getting the players ready for this game, and another big time game that he lost. So
I okay, so I don't like to put it all on the head coach. Ultimately, I understand it's their responsibility to get players prepared and all of that, but someone who's in charge of the defense is the defensive coordinator for the team, who is supposed to come up with plans of attack of how to attack like the opposing team's offense and vice versa. And Dan Quinn just got outcoached and outperformed defensively as well.
yeah, also I can see that he was more likely going to exit out of Dallas, more than likely, no matter what kind of thing. Like knowing he was going to get the head coaching job, and he just kind of, I just feel like he wanted to get out of Dallas kind of too. And now he's a Commanders coach, so I just think he just, yeah, just kind of slacked on a lot of things for sure. And that's on Mike McCarthy for not getting Dan Quinn ready as well, because he's the head coach. He needs to know what Dan Quinn's game plan is, and so
See, I kind of disagree a little bit because I feel like ultimately I know McCarthy's more worried about offensive play calling the plays for the offense, which Kellen Moore did last season. Ultimately took a job with the Chargers this season, and now is the Philadelphia Eagles' new offensive coordinator too. But Dan Quinn has been in Dallas for what, 4 years, 5 years almost now?
yeah, it's been about four, I would say.
So he should know this team's defense, and his defense ranked in like the top five throughout most of this season. So you would think that he would know exactly how to go into this game prepared. So kind of what happened.
Yeah, just to start the game, just first drive, the Packers looked pretty well. They were balanced on the rushing game and the passing game. They were able to do a little bit of everything in the first drive that I watched. Remember 7-0, and then I would say Dak did make some mistakes. Throwing two picks, one for a pick six, and I mean the game was kind of out of hand at halftime. Really, it was looking really bad for the Dallas Cowboys for sure in the first half, and just wasn't able to get settled into a good game plan, and yeah, just wasn't able to execute, and I think just didn't have a great game plan going into the game really to attack the Packers defense. So
There was a lot of eyes though on a bunch of teams this season, like heading into preseason and then regular season, postseason, all that stuff. So just bias aside, so let's trying to be as unbiased as possible here. Out of all 32 teams in the NFL this season, who fell up short when it came to the media's expectations of them?
Hmm. Are we talking about the media's expectations during like the
Just
the
like
off
the
season or just the middle of the season?
the whole package. I'm talking
The
off
whole okay.
season, preseason, regular season, and postseason
Well, the
too.
media always hypes up the Cowboys, so that would be my first response. But since I'm a Cowboys fan, I'll just say another team that I think kind of failed expectations was I would probably have to say this is kind of tough, but I would kind of
For me,
I would say Dolphins somewhat,
Why?
because they were looking so well in the first 3 or 4 games. They put up 70 points in one game. Their offense was super explosive, and they just weren't able to get the job done. And also the Ravens too. Obviously, just because they were looking great the entire season, everybody was praising Lamar like this could be the year, and they fell short at home in the playoffs, which is just devastating. Since I thought this was the year, they also had a great defense, getting Hamilton in the secondary, and also Lamar getting more to pieces with Odell Beckham Jr. this year, acquiring him, and Zay Flowers from Boston College, another great wide receiver who had a great year. And yeah, I just think they, with Dolphins and the Ravens both, kind of failed expectations for this year.
See, I would have to go with the Philadelphia Eagles for the sole reason that there is, in my eyes, there's no reason why you should lose 6 out of your last 7 games. When you started off the season 10-1, albeit they did not look like a really good 10-1 team at all, winning nearly half of their games just by one possession. 3 of those games they should have lost. Like they really should have been 7-4 at that point.
Yeah.
But losing 6 out of your last 7, this was the team also who went to the Super Bowl last year. Ultimately, fell short of the title to Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. But I think the media had dubbed this Philadelphia Eagles team as it's like expected to go back to the Super Bowl. And when you looked at after that loss to the 49ers for the Chiefs, I mean to the Eagles, it just went downhill. And I know that the Eagles lost like their offensive coordinator, I believe, and their defensive coordinator too. But
Yeah.
if we just take that aside for a minute, Jalen Hurts did not look like the quarterback we knew from last season. Just the whole unit just didn't look as prepared. And there's also expectations for Nick Sirianni as well. And if we hold Mike McCarthy to these very, very high standards, the same standard should be held for all these other coaches too. And it feels like some of these other coaches, like the Eagles and Nick Sirianni, got the pass where all the blame was headed right towards Mike McCarthy and the Dallas Cowboys. Do you think that's a fair assessment of how the media views teams?
Yes, I would agree on that for sure. Just on the Eagles season, Nick Sirianni, making the Super Bowl, and then just kind of having this letdown at the end of the year for sure.
So I've the whole episode, as you guys have listened and heard, if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to Spotify, we talked about, is it time to stop putting expectations on teams when they haven't reached certain levels of either success or lived up to the expectations that we know they are capable of reaching. So, one final question to you. Without putting any expectation on any team, what team are you hoping to see bounce back from this season next season?
I would definitely say the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Okay.
I think for sure that, they're just this team where they had a great year. I mean, they were in first place in the AFC for a while, and then they kind of, just again, like the Eagles, just kind of fell apart. Lost to the Titans. The Titans in the last game. If they would have won that game, they would have made the playoffs. They lost to a 3-14 Titans team. Devastating loss. Couldn't make the playoffs. I expect them to bounce back really well. Love Trevor Lawrence. Great quarterback. And we'll see how they do for next year.
So if since you went with an AFC team, right?
Yes, I went with an AFC.
I said then I'm gonna switch things up. Go with an NFC team just to kind of make it so we're not completely on one conference side versus the other. But if I were to pick an NFC team, I would like to see bounce back. I would have to say I not just talked about them, but I think it's gonna have to be the Philadelphia Eagles for me. Just because Jalen Hurts is a really good quarterback. He's a very mobile quarterback too. And when you've made it to a Super Bowl the previous season and just barely almost squeezed into the postseason and lose in the first round too, just like the Dallas Cowboys, I think a lot of people have the Eagles beating the Bucks at the time, same as the Cowboys beating the Packers and so forth. But I would like to see the Eagles bounce back. I would like to see some changes made. I know that they are capable of making. And I think above all, just if we're going to stop talking teams for a second, I want the media to stop putting expectations and holding head coaches to certain standards and giving other coaches a pass when they are just as guilty of the same thing. And by that, I mean it's time to stop giving excuses. It's time to stop praising certain coaches and certain players when they don't perform to your level of expectation. We took take Lamar for example. Everyone he won MVP, he rightfully deserved that, but his postseason record has shown not to be great. But people always are going to dub him as a really great quarterback, two-time MVP, one of the greatest to ever do it aside from Patrick Mahomes, but they're already putting him in that category. But if you hold Patrick Mahomes and you hold Josh Allen to certain standards, if you hold, in a way, Joe Burrow and Dak Prescott to certain levels of expectation, you have to give that expectation to all the quarterbacks across the league and not just put it into a box of about 5 or 6. So, with that, that's going to conclude our little special Saturday segment video. Once again, Michael, thanks so much for doing this with me again.
Yes,
I had fun
thank you.
talking this with you. And what would you like to say as one final thing about media expectations for sports teams in the NFL?
Yeah, just to not put many expectations on them in the off season. Get into the middle of the season to kind of see how they're playing out, and that's when you can kind of start to put expectations: who's in playoffs, who's not, as teams, and also as players. You know, they're not going to be as well in the first couple of weeks, but they get into a flow of the NFL season, get games under their belts, and then in the middle of the season, start putting expectations on players, teams, coaches, whatever it might be. So.
All right. And with that, we are going to conclude this episode. Stay tuned next week. We're going to do a little bit of stuff happening within the NBA. Obviously, with college basketball, March Madness is approaching within the next month. We'll be doing a lot of segments on that. We'll be also diving into some media bias and media perception of teams in the NBA and the NFL. We might do like a little Super Bowl recap, what happens with Super Bowl 58. So stay tuned. There's a lot of good new content coming, and I'll catch you on the next episode. What was that?